world is a book, and those who do not travel read only one page. Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. Our topic of discussion today is protecting Sri Lanka's tourism industry. Joining us this evening on the show are Malik Fernando, Chairman, Sri Lanka Tourism Alliance; Shanitha Fernando, Founder CEO of Authenticities; Arosha Perera, Consultant in Tourism Marketing; Maxime Wickramasinghe, Director Marketing, Thema Collection, as well as Chalana Perera, Founder of Retrace Hospitality. Joining me to pose questions from our panelists this evening, onto my immediate right is Newsfirst, Consultant Director at Newsfirst. Onto my immediate left is Nadeem Majid, Independent Journalist. You too can join in as far as the conversation is concerned. The number to send in your messages is via WhatsApp, 076 656 5353. The number once again, 076 656 5353. We would be delighted to take these questions to our panelists this evening as the show goes along. So let's get the ball rolling today with Malik Fernando, Chairman of Sri Lanka Tourism Alliance. Malik, on the 23rd of October, just a few days ago, we saw a bombshell as far as Sri Lanka tourism was concerned. Travel advisories was the order of the day. We saw US, UK advising their citizens not to visit Arugambay because of threats against Israeli tourists. Is Sri Lanka safe?
I believe firmly it is. I'm no security consultant, but based on common sense and what I've found out, the alerts and the advisories have been reckless. They have not thought through the implications, and it has not been on a balance of risk versus impact on a country. Now, let me just run through the sequence on that day. I was driving up the highway from Cape Beligama. Up to that time, the season was looking great. It was the best season ever, probably before COVID as well. Bookings were strong. We were getting bookings 18 months forward. Everything was looking very rosy. Suddenly, we get an alert saying that the US has declared this alert on Arugambay. Bombshell, right? Few minutes later, and this is how the advisories work, and this is how things spiral out of control. Few minutes later, it goes live on CNN as headline news. Few seconds later, the Israeli newspaper says Israelis are not safe anywhere in Sri Lanka. So it started out with the US saying that Arugambay, that there was a credible threat. Then CNN and the Israeli media spreads it all of Sri Lanka. So immediately I get on the phone to Travel Trade in the UK and the US, and we say, look, okay, let's put a statement together saying that this is how far Arugambay is. This is before we found out the facts, and that all the other tourism areas are safe. They're far away from Arugambay, and generally high-end travelers don't go to Arugambay. Fine. So we put out that statement. No cancellations yet. A few moments later, or I think it was that morning, the UK issues an advisory saying terror threat in Sri Lanka, bombs can go off anywhere, identifying locations, and as evidence, it cites the US alert on Arugambay. So this is how things mushroom. It starts in Arugambay, right, where there are not enough Israelis to even form a cricket team or two cricket teams to organize a match. And then it enlarges to all of Sri Lanka. Then it goes global. Then the industry sees a stream of cancellations which are continuing to this day. You also see a slowdown in booking interest in terms of online searches, because whether you are at the same level, a lower level, higher level, whether people are saying don't come to Sri Lanka, there is a terror alert. For the average traveler, if there is some sense of trouble, they don't look at the nuances behind it. They know that there is a risk of terror in Sri Lanka, which we know is not the case, simply because on subsequent investigation, we all found out there had been alerts 2 weeks prior. The alerts had been addressed systematically, unlike the previous time in 2019. Generally, the parties were satisfied that proper steps were taken. There were 3 arrests before the advisory, no developments or arrests subsequent to the advisory, no explosives found. The fact of the matter is, at the point the first advisory went out, things were brought under control. Every country in the world has hundreds of alerts every day. If you look at London, there are many threats that the US and the UK authorities cooperate on. The US do not issue a travel advisory on the UK because, mark my words, at this time there'll be hundreds of risks which are being passed by the two agencies. So just like an agency very close to us shared information in confidence and action was taken, security matters should have been handled outside the glare of the global media. And from a risk perspective, let me say, if Arugambe was in fact a target, it was off-season. There were hardly any travelers there. I'll bet you there was a single American there. There were about 19 Israelis. And a specific alert on Arugambe when all necessary precautions had been taken, including every Israeli being surrounded by an armored car. My hotels, 2 weeks ago, every day we had to give data on any Israelis who checked in to the police as long as 2 weeks ago.
So Malik, usually we see travel advisories being issued by the US State Department, the UK government. This time around, we see a travel advisory being issued by the US Embassy of Colombo. Is there an ulterior motive behind this travel advisory? Because if you look at the context of the statement in question, it says, due to the serious risk posed by this threat, the embassy imposes travel restriction on embassy personnel for Arugambe effective immediately and until further notice. Now, this is the first time in the history of Sri Lanka we see statements of this nature being issued by an embassy in question.
See, the embassy could have put that notice out on their public security Slack channel. They needn't have gone public with it. Of course, now we're told that there isn't a double standard, that if you tell your embassy staff, you have to tell the American public at large. For me, it's very strange. Either it's reckless and negligent, or there's more to it. We've got 2 hours, so I'm sure we can explore that further. But to me, it smells, because it is something that is totally overkill. It is something where those issuing the advisories knew and were reasonably comfortable that the correct steps were being taken. So anyone, I'm not naming names, but anyone from any of the embassies who says after Easter 2019, we have to be careful. Easter 2019, there was no advisory. The embassies were clueless. The government were totally clued up and were utterly negligent. You cannot compare what happened in 2019 to what happened 2 weeks ago. Every possible step was taken. My hotels, which were nowhere near Arugambe, the one in Yala, we were getting calls every day. Any Israelis checked in. And even now, well before the supposed date of the incident, every single Israeli was surrounded by security. And it was a very homemade, gather a plot, not at all sophisticated. So in my view, I don't want to cast any specific blame, but it was totally out of order.
7 days after the statements were issued, a complete U-turn today by the US ambassador in question. How do you view this?
The ambassador is a dear friend. She's making a statement of fact that it is not a travel ban. That's true. But try telling that to CNN. What she should do, ideally, is there's no point telling the local media, because the way this happens is this is issued, it's picked up internationally, the damage is done. Headlines that there is a terror threat. The withdrawal of the threat or the modification of the threat, like she said, that it is not a travel ban, it's always level 2. It has always been level 2, but most people don't know what level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4 is. The withdrawal or clarification goes in the obituary columns. So the fact that there is a terror problem goes on the front page. Any qualification by any embassy or the withdrawal goes in the obituary section. Right. No one reads it.
Thanks a lot, Malik. Fernando, Chairman, Sri Lanka Tourism Alliance. I now move my attention towards Shanitha Fernando, founder CEO of Authenticities. Shanitha, Western travel advisories, we see the US, UK being very quick to issue these statements on the 23rd of October. Are these travel advisories being used unfairly against smaller nations like Sri Lanka to further their geopolitical objectives, given the context that we are facing right now in the country?
Thank you for having me. Travel advisories are nothing common to Sri Lanka. We have seen this over the last 30 years. When I look at the last few ones that we have had, and when Sri Lanka has addressed all the concerns of security concerns, taking terror alerts seriously, I feel this is very harsh, especially for a country that is still reeling out of a big economic collapse. I mean, these sort of travel advisories do huge damage to the local economies, the communities, the entire industry. Now, I think we have come to a stage to turn the page. I think governments must engage all these foreign missions and engage them. There is no way we can continue with that. Of course, if there's a genuine threat, sure, the government will act on it. But these Western countries, I also believe sometimes is very harsh. I mean, you look at their embassy staff living in Colombo. They are spending their weekends in the south. They are in Arosha. They are having a good time, but they are telling their own countrymen not to visit Sri Lanka.
So when you look at countries, Shanitha, Sri Lanka depends on tourism. Let's look at Turkey for an example.
Yeah.
We just saw several days ago, that was just 4 days ago, an explosion in Turkey killed 3 people and 14 others were injured in an attack at a Turkish aerospace company near Ankara. We didn't see CNN carry stories about warning citizens not to travel to Ankara. We didn't see the US Embassy issuing a statement either. In fact, Istanbul and other Turkish cities are full of American citizens right now. And why is poor Sri Lanka is sandwiched amongst all this?
I think you have to also look at the economies of scale. We've been a smaller country, impoverished, having going through the worst economic crisis last year. We are a small fry in this business. So if you compare to our neighbor India, who's a superpower now, I mean, they won't tolerate these things. They will address the embassies. They will send the ambassadors home, like what you see, which is going on between Canada and India at the moment. I mean, nobody would dare think of putting these conditions to India, because India will be right away, it will be reciprocal. But we, having such a small economy of scale and having gone through so much, we have become very unfortunate. They always put the pressure on us.
Why is Western nations trying to muscle their way against countries like Sri Lanka? This is a pity. We've seen this happening right throughout. We've seen this happening in the early 80s where India tried to muscle their way against Sri Lanka. Now we see the European countries doing it, the Western world doing it. Why are we always sandwiched, Shanitha? This is not fair.
I can imagine on the international stage, there are concerns Sri Lanka hasn't still addressed, which I don't want to talk about. Those are non-related to tourism, whether it's in the Geneva Convention or whether it's the war crimes or whatever. But I feel that's the only reason they are still holding us with vigor, because we haven't still addressed those issues. That's why I say it's time has come to turn the page, and we have a new regime in place, and they must surely engage with these foreign missions and to ensure that such harsh travel advisories, some unwarranted, are not put in place.
Thank you very much, Shanitha Fernando, founder CEO of Authenticities. We now move our attention towards Arosha Perera, consultant in tourism marketing. Arosha's a big black mark on the Sri Lankan clean slate over the last few months, last few years. Why? How badly is this going to affect Sri Lanka in the longer run?
I think this is a point at which we need to take a step back. Crises are par for the course in any business, in any industry. But I think what this situation really shows is how vulnerable the tourism industry really is, right? We've been talking about building a resilient tourism industry, as far as I know, since 2019. I think it's good at this point to ask, how far have we come down that road? Have we done really what we set out to do? Because, from a marketing and communications point of view, this is where a competitive brand really plays a role. Because it's in times of crisis that a brand really provides your air and ground cover. Mm-hmm. Resilience really means, are you minimizing the fallout? And can you accelerate getting back up again? Right? That's what resilience is. And that's exactly what a brand does for you. If you build a long-term brand based on long-term values, not just about selling our beaches and mountains, about building a brand that takes advantage of the opportunities that are out there for Sri Lanka to be competitive as a tourism industry, right? That means you build an affinity with travelers. Yes, there are points at which negative issues like this come up, but you minimize the fallout in terms of the negative perceptions that build up in people's heads. You minimize the chances of people cancelling because you're falling in love with the destination and that's something that you bought into it. So you think twice about, is this serious enough for me to take drastic actions or not? So in the absence of a strong brand, I mean, I think we can clearly agree around the table that Sri Lanka does not still have a brand presence. I think it creates a big hole for us where, crises like this, which will prop up. I mean, now it's a travel advisory, tomorrow it will be something else. It was COVID, it was terrorism. It's going to be something else next week.
Agree more.
Yeah, so Arosha, just to get back on this resilient nation thought that you brought out just a couple of seconds ago. Sri Lanka is seeing a political transformation in the country right now. We have a new president. There's a general election that's going to be held on the 14th of November. We need our foreign reserves to come in, and tourism plays a very big role to cushion our foreign reserves in the country, and as a result of that, the exchange plays a pivotal role. The exchange plays a pivotal role, and as such, it's good for the country's economy. When such travel advisories are being issued, is the Western nations trying to show that they reign supreme over Sri Lanka and they can do whatever they want?
Well, I can only answer this question again from a brand lens and that point of view. I mean, I guess my message to any new administration that comes in is that consistency and continuity are two very important factors when it comes to ensuring that you have a narrative out there for Sri Lanka, whether it be for tourism or as a country, as a nation, right? So that if it changes based on the whims of administrations, then you're not going to build that consistency and continuity. So my message would be to look at the industry and what it needs long term, and to make sure you devote the resources and the attention to make sure you have that narrative out there, which you have a narrative that you control. Right now, we only have narratives that are controlled by negative news most of the time, and that's all our travelers hear about Sri Lanka, because we don't have any presence as a nation or as an industry.
Thank you very much, Arosha Perera, consultant in tourism marketing. Maxime Wickramasinghe, Director Marketing, Thema Collection. Maxime, just a couple of weeks ago when we were speaking about the country's economy and what sort of reforms are needed to build Sri Lanka, we had your father, Chandra Wickramasinghe, on the show, and he said that he looked at tourism very optimistically. He said that you all have been booked up until April next year. However, this travel advisory that came into play on the 23rd of October, has this affected in any way to the bookings in your hotels? Because Malik told us before that most of the bookings had been cancelled as a result of the CNN statement that was going significantly. So, any cancellation of bookings?
Look, I think in terms of bookings, I think we have maybe seen a few cancellations in the books, but I think what's really important is the bookings that will come forward, because it's that news that you don't really understand. Now they say that your time and attention is usually around 15 seconds, but you still digest that news article about Sri Lanka that the negativity has gone through. So even if you have someone, even a backpacker to a high-end tourist who is looking to think about their last-minute holiday destination, they might not necessarily, or they might think about Sri Lanka on a list, and they might not go for Sri Lanka because they've had that news that, okay, something went wrong in Sri Lanka. And that's often sometimes what we get even when we speak to our partners in the industry and all of that, is that that news, that bad news coverage is there because there's nothing good to counteract it. So that is extremely important. So I think it's going to be extremely hard to...
As Malik said, now they have a responsibility to correct the damage that has been done.
Yes, absolutely. I think so. And I think that's often, like, I think, as Mr. Malik mentioned, the problem is, the bad news will always travel faster. So I think they have to do a bit of work to change, and, put some positivity out there to say that, okay, this was addressed, and put some good statements that, it has gone the security situation is now back to normal. But I think that's when, our tourist board should play that part also and get that positive news out there, and also, communicate in a way where, you are mitigating all the negativity that has been brought out. Unfortunately, at the moment, we still haven't launched our global campaign. We still don't have tourism officers in the major places, in our major source markets. So I think, as a private sector, that's very much the message that we carry. But, we only have so much weight. So if we have the weight of the government behind us as well, and, the plans are in place, but now with the new regime, we're not quite sure what really is going to happen with all the global marketing and all the campaigns.
So, Maxime, the statement that was issued by the US ambassador today perplexed me a little bit, because she says in her statement, our security alert last week is for Americans to avoid Arugam Bay until further notice. But our overall travel advisory for Sri Lanka remains exactly the same at level 2. Now, does this statement mean that US citizens now can visit Arugam Bay?
I need to get into the specifics of that, but I believe they still can't go to Arugam Bay unless that's changed. But
It's only an advisory.
It's just an advisory, yeah. It's just an advisory. But if your government tells you not to do something, especially, unfortunately, we have that syndrome also, that when it doesn't happen in Western countries for such alerts, but when it does happen, people don't really care, because they see us, as a developing country, very far away, exotic destination.
Because
so
we also, as a nation, Maxime, thinking of all this, I think when 9/11 happened, Sri Lanka should have issued a travel advisory against the United States. When the twin attacks took place in London train station, Sri Lanka also should have issued travel advisories. But we don't do that. This is definitely trying to trample smaller nations and to have their agenda reign supreme.
See, look, I can't really talk about why exactly this has happened, because I'm not behind those curtains. I don't know what's happening behind the scene. But if it was a genuine security alert, as they said, and as Mr. Malik said, was treated in due time before this actually happened,
right?
Then you always have to think about also the impacts of when you put out a security alert. But I think overall, the situation is very much, it's for us to also take the front foot, and also to work on our communications and what we actually put out there now. And unfortunately, we don't really even have that mechanism in place to actually do that. So I think these alerts might unfortunately come in the future.
Are they trying to show who has more power, Maxime? That's what a lot of people today, when we went to social media, a lot of people were saying that they're trying to show who reigns supreme in this battle against power. Now, 14th of November is elections in Sri Lanka. They just want to show who the boss is. Don't mess with us.
Look, I think that...
Because we've seen that, Maxime, when Sri Lanka banned asbestos to the country from Russia, suddenly there was a bug in some Sri Lankan container that went to Russia. We've seen these things happening. And once the asbestos ban was lifted, Russia was all okay to import teas from Sri Lanka again. So is it something like that which is happening right now?
Look, I don't see a real reason for it. I think, the role of foreign mission and all these advisories is to, be overly cautious as well. So I think we also have to remember that. And I think what has happened here is probably maybe over caution on the issue.
Right. Chalana Perera, founder of Retrace Hospitality. Chalana, you work with many companies right now as we speak. Tell us, if you were to advise the government now, what sort of advice should it be with regard to these travel advisories that are being issued? And what steps must they take to address issues of this sort?
Well, I think advising the government, I'll focus specifically on the tourism-related agencies within the government machinery, of which there are several, and they're quite well resourced, right? There's a TDL, so there is revenue streams into the tourism agencies. What needs to happen going forward and in perpetuity really is proactive communication, to Arosha and Malik's points on building a brand consistently and with continuity, right? So it's about building confidence over time and credibility over time in brand Sri Lanka. This is going beyond tourism, because you're talking about nation branding, and you take Singapore and Switzerland as easy examples with very solid nation branding, but you take countries that are far less resourced than even Sri Lanka, like Bhutan or Rwanda, tiny economies, landlocked, GDP per capita that are significantly lower. They've got solid national branding strategies, including tourism, but for everything, really, like the quality of education, healthcare, what does the experience in Rwanda feel like, what does it mean if you just go there for business? So what we tend to do as a country, private and public sector, is categorize tourism as an industry. And I've had clients ask me, why can't tourism function like the garments industry did in the 80s and 90s, or the IT sector does? I said, well, you can't outsource Sri Lanka tourism to Guatemala or Haiti, right? Your brand building is your nation. So the proactive communication stance hasn't happened, in my view, simply because there's a constant change in authorities, and there are also multiple bodies. Right? If you take the private sector, there are so many tourism organizations at different levels, and in the public sector as well. It's part of what keeps this island quite beautiful and authentic, but it is also a challenge to get consolidated and centralized communication. What will it take for the government? I really think it will take quite some discipline, and also to hear from the experts with a long-term plan. There's tons of plans on shelves, but they're not acted on.
Yeah.
Right?
Chalana, now we are coming closer to an election. Just 3 weeks from now, we will be holding Sri Lanka's general election after President Anukumar Dissanayake took over power. Why is the opposition silent on matters like this? This could probably be one of the rhetorics that they could use to spark patriotism in the country, as a result, gain some momentum at the next election as well. But we don't see any opposition party right now talking of the betterment of the country. May it be the SJB, may it be the SLPP, may it be the SLFP, may it be the independent parties who are contesting the elections. We don't see them talking about all this. This probably could be another slogan to make sure that patriotism is inbuilt in the country, and as a result, that rhetoric can take center stage at the November 14th elections.
I mean, I'll respond very simply. I think it's far too soon to comment on the political changes. It's just been a couple of weeks, so.
Right. So I want to open the floor for questions from our panelists from our journalist. On to my right is Nilesh Shetami, on to my left is Nadeem Majid. Nilesh, with your permission, shall we start with Nadeem today?
Certainly, yes.
Right.
Thank you, Shamir. Mr. Fernando, actually, my first question is to you, because we know that with this incident, an issue that has come to the forefront is of tourists overstaying visas, running businesses allegedly illegally, dodging taxes, evading registration, etc. Back in February, the Immigration Controller actually issued notice to the Tourism Ministry requesting specifically Russians and Ukrainians who have stayed on extended visas or have extended visas over a year to leave the country. Then the president at the time, Wickramasinghe, put a stop to it, I believe, and said, we're investigating this notice. But despite numerous complaints from local operators themselves, local communities at times, there hasn't really been any will from the authorities to address this issue, or even to provide clarity on what steps are being taken. Because we do know that while we do need to grow the tourism industry, foreign investment, not just in tourism, but across the board in Sri Lanka, is necessary. Who's responsible for this? Who should take responsibility for this and ensure that things are done in a proper, bona fide way?
See, it's a whole of government thing, meaning we know that government isn't necessarily fully connected and aligned. Now, it's a tough question. If I can take a bit of a helicopter view, we heard from Arosha and Chalana, and Maxime also, about the need for positioning a country brand, and all of that is connected to your question. Now, think of an FMCG company. Now, you have FMCG companies within your group. think of any of them operating without a marketing and sales department. That's how Sri Lanka operates. We are probably the only high potential tourism destination which has zero consumer marketing. The last time we had a consumer marketing campaign was 2007. Chalana spoke about Rwanda. Remember the genocide? Travelers don't realize that because they go to watch gorillas paying $2,000 a pop. There are dozens of global international brands in Rwanda, a handful here, who are crying. And I know this is only for a domestic audience, so I don't mind bearing some of the dirty linen. I wouldn't do this if this had a broad audience. Now, if you don't have a brand, if you don't have marketing, if you don't have what does Sri Lanka tourism stand for in terms of attracting tourists who pay a fair price, stay in the formal sector, and have a spin-off in terms of paying taxes and being net contributors as opposed to detractors as they have been in the recent past. I'm not saying all, but some significant groups like you mentioned. We need to do that. In the absence of that, we will grasp at any tourist who lands here from anywhere, spending $5 a day and worship them because we think tourists are gods. They're not. I mean, we're just carrying out commerce, right? So there are hundreds and thousands of bona fide expat travelers in the south who are legitimate. By the way, it's very difficult to carry out a legitimate business in Sri Lanka. If you want to register, you cannot. If you want to get a liquor license, you cannot. If you want to register for anything. So there are so many hurdles to being legitimate that when some people say illegal businesses...
And that's the same for both foreigners and locals.
Exactly. So now I'm very happy to say Dr. Hans Vijayasuriya is going to digitize the whole of government because the whole point is if you want a liquor license, apply online. If you want a tourist board license, apply online. Because I will tell you, you'll get so many more travelers, whether they're from Israeli or Russian or wherever, if they come in and they're told this is how you register, I mean, they'll do it if it's easy enough. They'll even pay their taxes. Now it's close to impossible for most travelers to comply with the laws of the land because the laws are so complicated. So that's one short answer. The other answer is, if I may, is that we have to be focused on attracting the right kind of traveler. Previous governments may not have wanted to take drastic action thinking that they'll deter travelers. But a lot of the travelers we're getting are the wrong kind of traveler. That's related to marketing. We do not have a marketing department in our tourism infrastructure. Now, when this crisis happened, what most other destinations would have done is they'll have a conference call with all of their global PRs. That's what I would do as a brand. They would have a conference call with all of their global marketing officers. The PR would immediately put out articles, go to the media, go to the newspapers. The sales officers would go to trade and assure them that everything is okay. Sri Lanka Tourism has a grand total of, guess how many PRs we have? Public relations agencies? 0. Maldives has about 16. How many overseas sales partners do we have who do trade calls? 0. So again, going back to the earlier point, the issue honestly is not the embassies and the advisories. That's how we get hammered. But we have to stand up. We have to respond. We have to stop being defenseless.
We have to stop being reactive.
We have to stop being reactive. We have to essentially step out confidently. Every government talks about tourism being very critical and does bugger all about it, right? They have to create an enabling environment. They have to create a plan. They have to create a marketing strategy. They have to position this destination. Another critical point. How much do you think our tourism revenues are? You hear a number of 4 billion, 5 billion. Again, these are domestic audience. I'm quite happy to say that here. The way they calculate it, all those Israelis in Arugam Bay sitting there sipping a beer, every couple, according to statistics, is spending $326 a day. What do they spend? Minus 200 because they rent to other Israelis and send it out to Tel Aviv. So actually, our whole tourism structure is short.
Malik, just to get into the travel advisories a little bit more, because we saw the man in wish how you issued a statement being the chairman of Sri Lanka Tourism Alliance. I just want to understand now, December is the peak season for Sri Lanka in terms of tourism. Is this going to be affected or impacted because of the travel advisory that we saw on the 23rd of October?
I think
How much in advance do tourists book? They're not going to wait till December.
No, they go between 14 months to 2-3 months. But fundamentally, this was the first, maybe the second year, where we were getting bookings 12 months in advance. So the winter looks pretty solid at reasonable rates. Fortunately, because there was no incident, right? There was no incident, and there was no major find apart from a couple of people being arrested. The news cycle is over, right? In the sense that it's died down because it wasn't picked up. And then if you look at the UK media, quite a few of them who know the country, who know intrinsically we're safe. See, even the Israelis who got the alert, they just stayed back. They were hanging out. They were cool. They were not serious, right? They knew that they were safe. So, in my view, the news cycle in terms of the current advisory, the damage is done. There were cancellations, right? As Maxime said, there are hesitations. There are certainly people who are researching a holiday to Sri Lanka who have hesitated, who parked it, who may say next year, or have already booked somewhere else. That we don't know. But for sure there's an effect.
But what led to this travel advisory? Now, based on what you're saying, Malik, there was no visible threat in the country. And as a result of that,
I think it was unthinking.
when we see something of this sort coming
But
to play.
Malik, this is not some amateur writer sitting in the embassy. These are coming from Washington. They are very serious. Their intelligence is among the best in the world. So every word is absolutely thought out, and 10 different people will go through this before it is released.
I firmly believe the advisory should not have been published. It was based on the same old stale news, whatever they might say about specific information. It's the same specific information that was shared and acted on prior to the advisory. The advisory, I repeat, should not have been issued. It was a mistake.
But are
As
we
to their
being-
motives, I can't say.
Are we being bullied here
See,
as a smaller nation?
yeah, there's partially an element. I don't think anyone willfully wants to bully, but we have to adopt the posture that we cannot be bullied.
Are you sure about the Western world not trying to bully Sri Lanka, Malik? Do you want me to give you some examples over the last few years how they have bullied Sri Lanka?
There was,
Based on the women fancy?
You're trying to make me say something, but to me, this was very odd. It smells. It shouldn't have happened, right? I can't read their mind as to why it happened, but categorically, I've gone on the record. The reason I immediately went on the record is I made a few inquiries. I understood it. I was incandescent with rage because I could see it was so unfair on Sri Lanka and our tourism industry. It was unfair. And whatever is said, it cannot be supported by the evidence.
Can I give some background?
Shanitha, just to understand this statement that was issued by the US Embassy in Colombo on the 23rd, let's look at the words that they have used. They've said credible information warning. Then they say serious risk posed by this threat. Then they say embassy personnel for Arugamba effective immediately and until further notice not to travel. Then strongly urged to avoid the Arugamba area until further notice. Suspicious activity. And then it goes on to say, your gut, trust your gut. If a situation doesn't feel right, get out of it. Subjective statement, Shanitha.
These are nothing new.
very
Always
subjective.
in the last 10 years, if you analyze, the language has been the same. If I may go back to last year or soon after the political crisis, all these embassies, some of the advisories they put, if you are coming to Sri Lanka, be careful. There is food shortages. There is no hospitals. There is shortages in medicine. So much so, embassies said, please enhance your insurance so that you can be repatriated to another country or airlifted to another country in case of some medical issues in Sri Lanka. I mean, that how low they went. I mean, we all know hotels had enough food for our clients. Hospitals were there. So
I like Malik's response to this as well. You use words, Malik, very strongly on your statement as well. You say travel advisories are blunt tools. You say uncalibrated response from foreign embassies displays callousness. You were really pissed off with all these statements that was
I
issued
still am, because
by the Western world.
yeah, because the thing is,
You were angry.
this particular location had very few people. It was off season, and you can't talk of 2019. There was a totally different approach there. So it was callous in the end result. It may have been careless and then callous, negligent, whatever. It may have been geopolitics. You can't rule that out as well, because there are ways of sending messages. But I can't, there are individuals there buying up acres and
I
acres
just
of
want to
land.
understand, you say geopolitical issues and all that. We saw on the 20th of October 2024, Malik, Sri Lanka was a signatory to a letter signed by 105 countries condemning Israel for banning UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres from entering their country. So I'm just trying to understand, was this a result of that?
I have no idea. I mean, there's more. Put it this way, right? This is not what I'm saying, but
Because
a
this
lot
was
of
not
people
only
are
Sri
saying
Lanka, there
when
was
they don't
104 other
understand-
countries as well.
Yeah, when
And
they
this is all
believe,
over social media.
when they believe that the statement was not supported by facts, then they venture into geopolitics, whether it is the president of such and such a country who was to be invited here, or whether it was this statement, or whether it is something else.
Conspiracy theories, yeah.
Conspiracy theories arise simply because there is no rational explanation why 2 weeks after an alert, when an action, comprehensive action was taken, why this document saw the light of day. And the fact that that the moment it is issued, CNN teleprompter starts chattering literally seconds away. And then all the other Anglosphere, the group of embassies who cooperate on security matters immediately pipe in. Interesting, Russia also jumped in on this.
That's why we didn't see any of the Asian nations saying anything
Yeah,
like
and you
this.
notice the EU also were relatively quiet on this. They didn't, because they are a little bit more balanced and
Yes.
conservative. They don't jump.
The Japanese are very finicky travelers, but you didn't see them issuing something.
Yeah, I think they had updated something, but they had not broadcasted it as much. The thing with the US alert is it gets connected to the US media. That automatically gets picked up by the Israeli media. So the Israeli media said, get off the beaches, get off everywhere. And I'm reading this, having breakfast in a cafe, surrounded by 4 Israelis who were laughing and shouting and screaming in Hebrew. And I said, are you Israeli? They were like, yes. I said, you're perfectly safe. Like, so, I mean, yeah, for me it's a disconnect, because as we said earlier, look, anyone from any embassy who's watching this, you're absolutely safe, right? So you cruise around Sri Lanka, you'll go without your security, you'll go to the beaches, you know that. Okay, there is a duty of care that embassies have. I know, but in my view, it was not carried out fairly as far as Sri Lanka was concerned on this occasion. That's why I got angry.
So, Maxime, if you look at the last few months, now, this is a decisive time for Sri Lanka, undoubtedly. We are seeing some reform, we are seeing some change for the betterment of the country. We see progressive steps being taken, and we see even the numbers of tourist arrivals to the country has increased compared to last year. What is the message you have for the tourists who are visiting Sri Lanka?
Look, I would say, for the tourists, it's Sri Lanka. It's paradise on earth. There's so much you can do in such a small island, and there's no better place in the world, I would say, if you want to have a beautifully balanced holiday with a mix of a bit of everything. It's just it's very hard to describe. But I think just coming back to the other point on reforms and stuff like that, I think it is also important that we actually learn from this incident. I know there's been a lot of talk about unregulated foreign businesses, and I think that maybe is probably not even related to the issue at hand, but it did crop up. And I think it's really time for Sri Lanka to really look into that, because I think it's not just foreign businesses. I think I would say probably the tourism industry is up there with the least regulated industries in Sri Lanka. You just take I've heard this stated quite a few times on the show, but if you look at the statistics on a booking.com, you have around 50,000 rooms, I believe, registered with the tourist board, but on booking.com, I believe you have around 90,000 properties on it. So, you just do the math and you see that there's a big disconnect. But, there's, a lot of simple things also that really can be done. I think, firstly, we have to also find a way of actually maybe, working with the foreigners coming to invest in Sri Lanka. I think the trends also have changed now, foreigners, they want to leave their day jobs in London or wherever, and they want to come and, set up a very small scale project in Sri Lanka. It could be a cafe, it could be a little boutique hotel. And, in Sri Lanka, we really don't have, I think, as Mr. Malik said, that, if you're a BOI project, yes, okay, that you bring X amount of money in, you can do a certain investment.
But that shouldn't happen at the expense of the local industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we also have to really work with the locals in the areas. Something that's amazing that's really come up is you look at places like Alla, it's almost entirely run on homestays. So it's the people there who've actually monetized their homes, created rooms and, done things in that area. But, we also have to work with them to make sure that they come onto the registration to come and register and be part of, the tourist board. And, I think there is a lot of work you can actually do with the biggest source of bookings, which is booking.com. Because in Sri Lanka, it's probably one of the easiest countries. You don't have to really give anything, just a business registration, or even that I think you don't really need to if you're doing it in a home. But, for people that want to, set up certain types of hotels, and I'll give you a clear example. You look at the tourist star rating in Sri Lanka. Mm-hmm. The star ratings are been given ages ago. There's a big issue with them. I think they have to really modernize and come back. But if you look into if you look on an advertising level, most properties will always add an extra star, but there's nothing to regulate that. Mm-hmm. So, working with, and there are systems that you can work with these OTAs to actually make sure that what the government is, what the government deems your property to be is what is put out there. So you can work with these players to actually, bring in more revenue, get people to register, get people to, put in their proper way. And, in Sri Lanka, we have the issue that, you don't have a tourist board registration, but what's going to happen at the end of the day? Nothing. You just carry on business as usual. If you're selling alcohol, just give something to the excise officer and then it goes away. In Sri Lanka, we haven't created that mechanism. We haven't created the infrastructure to, get people to really, invest in a proper way in Sri Lanka. And I think it's very important that it's not an overnight thing that needs to happen, but we really have to look into how we can get that done, because a lot of these issues can get mitigated from that.
Maxime, I'm glad you brought in the issue of, whether this advisory was linked to growing animosity among within local community itself towards, let's say, allegedly illegal operators, right? Previously, the former tourism minister, Fernando, had already said, we've received numerous complaints about this practice, unable to take action because, these are rented properties, it's a but there was no real, let's say, recognition from the government of the issue. And in fact, just the week after the election on Face the Nation, on the regularly scheduled program, we had an official from the Inbound Tour Operators Association who had written to the new president. And he said that they had, after the visa, after having to rectify the whole visa mess, that this was number 3 on the list of issues that they had highlighted with the new president, which is illegal overstaying, running businesses, and not just cafes and little hostels, but also tour operations. And that was what they were primarily concerned about as well. Given that's the situation, do you feel that there may have been some link? And given that the people who've been arrested, who have been taken into custody on this as well, are also all Sri Lankans?
No, I don't think there is no. I feel like there is no link. The Israel-Palestine, the conflict that's going on is definitely a hot pot all over the world. You have these tensions, you have all this, from both sides on social media.
I guess if that was the case, you should issue a travel advisory for New York University as well.
Yeah, exactly. But, I think, it's not really related, but like I believe Nishad said on the program, it is definitely a ticking time bomb. And, it's something that you really have to address and take, again, like with marketing, the front foot on. We also have like lots of beautiful destinations in Sri Lanka that need a lot of protecting. For example, we'll take Yala, for example. It's almost, there's definitely, could say, too much infrastructure there. I just did a quick browse on booking.com, and if you take that entire region, excluding, places, I would say maybe 30-minute perimeter around the entrances, you have around 210 properties, which most of them would have 5 to 80, 90.
So I want to ask Malik. Malik, now I'm getting a lot of questions on these travel advisories that have been issued, and an individual who does not want to identify himself says, why do we welcome the Israeli community here when they have such a bad reputation? And will there not be plots in the future against them that will cause more advisories?
Israelis, I think, feel very welcome here. There are fewer and fewer places that they can travel to internationally.
Mike, only about 15,000 Israelis visited last year, correct?
It's interesting.
20,000?
It may be more, but funnily enough, yesterday I got a message from a colleague in Tel Aviv saying that Israelis have not been put off at all, and in fact, they're planning on coming back for Christmas because ultimately they know that Sri Lanka is totally safe. Now, getting back to your point, we have to be vigilant. There are plots and there were alerts and actions were taken. Security needs to be provided, not to the extent where it's being provided now, where you've got one sole Israeli surrounded by 8 troops, right? That's obviously not going to be good for tourism. But the point is, if we have a good intelligence network, and if we are, because ultimately, even in Arugam Bay, broadly the locals benefit economically from the Israeli travelers. There are issues relating to the prayer house and what's happening in Gaza and Lebanon and so on, no doubt. So geopolitics are impacting us as well, but it's not like the locals are, rising
Sri Lanka
up in
generally
unison.
is very welcoming. We open our arms when tourists come, and we are very hospitable.
A little bit too hospitable also, you might say.
Sometimes.
So we need to pick some of them out periodically.
Yeah.
But again, I think this is a country for everybody. This is a country where people should come and just de-stress, relax, and I think whether you're whatever side of the political spectrum or world you are, when you come, you're in a place of amazing beauty and serenity. Your holiday together. We just need to ensure that we are buttoned down.
Just to add to Ninesh's question, because one of the other things that Nishad sort of mentioned, and that has been reported on not just in Sri Lanka but in the international media as well. Last year, with a Russian-run operation, we saw this whites-only posts going out. And we've witnessed this happening at multiple places along the southern coast, especially. Not so much in Arugam to my knowledge, but actually even in Arugam in certain instances. Given this situation, what kind of action should the Sri Lankan authorities be taking? Because one of the complaints, like I said, the animosity that comes from local communities as well, and even from locals who are visiting, like local tourists, from whether they're from Colombo or anywhere else in the country, is that, is this Sri Lanka or am I in an apartheid state?
No, but hang on, you got to look at it like this, right? If you look at the so-called, the southern Riviera, say from Gaul, Unawatuna to Mirissa, a lot of the color, a lot of the vibrancy, a lot of the product development has come from these kinds of people. The bars, the restaurants. Soon after Putin invaded Ukraine, you had a rush of Russians coming. So who opened, I won't name the names, but who opened a lot of the very nice restaurants down there, some of the bars, which welcomed people from all over. So a lot of what was done, not just from Russia, but from Israel, from the UK, from Australia, France, wherever. Places like Ahangama developed on the back of foreigners coming, settling, loving it here, upskilling locals. And there's a vibrant community. There are bad eggs as well. But it's up to us to regulate them, facilitate their registrations, allowing, even if you want to comply, you can't comply with a lot of our regulations. So you've got to simplify it, you've got to digitize it, you've got to police it, you've got to get the message out that, don't mess around with Sri Lanka, follow the laws of this country, and then you won't have some of the issues that you spoke about.
So Maxime, we have a question for you from one of our viewers. Now, you mentioned about overstaying visas and carrying out businesses in the country. The question is, there are people in Sri Lanka on tourist visas. How can they set up businesses in the country?
Good question. Unfortunately, I didn't have the need to do it myself. So, no. Look, I think there's few different ways of doing it. To the way I know it, I believe in tourism, a foreigner can 100% own a business, but can't really own the land, right? So what you do is usually you work on a lease, or you work with a local business partner as well, and that also has posed a lot of problems because one party can very much get played out because they might put all the capital in, and that's not good for Sri Lanka either. So I think there are plenty of ways of actually doing it. None of them are really by the book. And
doesn't it also require collusion with politicians, with local officials, the excise department, police, local government, all those?
Enforcement is a problem across the country, even for Sri Lankans or for tourists, right? It applies. So if you try and get an excise license, probably the local person says, don't bother, pay me this and I'll get that for you. And even if you want to get a license, you have to jump through hoops. It's not possible. Even for the established players, it's a nightmare, right? Many Sri Lankan hoteliers, when it comes to excise license, how it works, if you've got a hotel, you've got 4 bars, you need to get 4 licenses, it's a nightmare. So honestly, it's not just a tourism-related thing. Tourists get on, they're more entrepreneurial than locals. That's normally, that's quite common.
But when you look at the current government's position on things like excise licenses, and they've made statements to the effect of going to restrict the number. Do you feel that you're going to have that what you're hoping for, better management, better enforcement, better marketing, better running of company Sri Lanka tourism, will that become the reality, or are we going to end up having more of a bureaucratic mess?
What is a start is they seriously intend to. There has to be a sincere intent. Succeeding is subject to setting up the structure and the willpower to get it done. It also takes 2 to tango. The industry needs to work hand in glove with the government in terms of addressing these practices. I really think we have a very good chance. It may be our final chance because we're running out of time in many endeavors. Even if you look at tourism, it is not a super profitable business which attracts foreign investors. If you look at most, again, being a domestic show, I don't mind saying this, is that for many investors in tourism, certainly in Colombo, but the bigger players, it's thankless because they don't get an ROI because our margins are so low, our rates are so low, our demand is impacted, we don't have a tourism marketing program. So I really feel that if the government is to genuinely uplift tourism, because that is our number one trade, right? We're not going to be a manufacturing hub for anything, is that they have to make it more rewarding. We have to get better room rates. We have to get higher spending travelers. Without higher spending travelers, the national airline will not do as well, right?
So just to understand, Arosha now, PCO Trail, we were talking about this on the 30th of January 2024 when Nat Geo validated the travel destination in Sri Lanka and said that Sri Lanka is set to attract a trending new international tourist segment with the PCO Trail that offers a world-class, nature-based experience in RT country. Now, since then, I have not heard anything about the PCO Trail until this very moment of time that we are talking about it. Why is that? Lack of branding in the country? The tourism board is not doing enough? What is the reason behind this?
So I think the PCO Trail was really an attempt at transforming the landscape of the kind of attractions that Sri Lanka had. It was going into this experiential kind of area, which was really a post-COVID trend. So you were creating something that travelers will be attracted to, which Sri Lanka previously kind of didn't have, which really built new assets for Sri Lanka.
It's a 300-kilometer
walking
curated
trip.
long distance.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And the beauty of it is it goes through plantations so that the plantations have a means of making money out of it through tourism. The communities, there are some 80 communities that it runs through. So livelihoods, homestays, all of that. But the thing is, for experiences such as this to take root, the private sector needs to work hand in glove with, like he very much said, with Sri Lanka tourism. Because at the end of the day, it needs to be one with destination marketing as well. So the authorities need to believe in different experiences like that, because that's a kind of a transformational experience. You're creating something that is demand-led, which we don't have too many of, let's be honest. Sri Lanka doesn't create experiences to cater to traveler demand. The private sector does. I mean, individually, I think the properties do, right?
Yeah, PCO Trail is entirely private sector, nothing to do with the state.
But Arosha, isn't it sad that just 2 years ago, when we had the Minister of Tourism, Fernando, on the show, he spoke so eloquently about this campaign, Come Back for More campaign. Now, he spoke about it. He said, we are going to do this. This is the first time that Sri Lanka is going to launch a campaign after a long time. Where is this campaign? Tell me. Under the rugs.
Yeah, so the campaign was
Shoved out of the window.
I think all the stakeholders around this table were...
I think that's been going on since about 1957. No politician comes on and says they're going to do something and they don't do it.
So on that note, actually, Chalana, if I can get your
No,
thoughts
but
on this.
Arosha, I just want to ask you now, what happened to that campaign? Now, where is that
was
campaign?
So there was no campaign, because I think one small stage of it was launched. But I mean, the bulk of it was supposed to take place. It should have been taking place now.
Can I just interject? There is a misunderstanding that having a tagline is a campaign. So you go through, so Sri Lanka, you'll come back for more. Asia, the small miracle. That's not a campaign.
And like,
I mean, to be honest, does anyone know what the tagline is of the most successful destinations? That's just like a little PR thing to give some agency some work, and then you
It's a
go to the
sticker to
newspaper.
put on a three-wheeler.
Yeah, forget it. Really, you got to put meat on the bones by having public relations, having articles in New York Times, Condé Nast Traveler, London Times, and doing consumer activation. Because who makes the travel decision?
So they want to make some money out of all this.
No, who?
No, but I don't know. No, you're saying.
No, I'm
these are-
saying that-
this is something.
I'm saying
something
that
to
they-
do with
Yeah.
giving someone a campaign for an agency. So
No, what
are
I'm
they
saying-
trying to make money on that as well? Because no, Malik, we know how the Sri Lanka Tea Board went on a campaign, and that campaign has not been launched. However, 200 million Sri Lankan rupees have been spent already.
I was on that committee 15 years ago when the campaign was first
So
started.
you're the problem, Malik.
with a 5 rupee per kilo figure, right? 15 years ago, it still hasn't seen the light of day. No, the point I was making, I'm not saying it was making money. What I'm saying is that there is a lack of understanding that the traveler and the consumer is the person who takes a decision about a holiday in Sri Lanka. So unless you reach the traveler, you'll get nothing done. That's why the travel advisories are very powerful, because we have nothing to counter it with. Right? That's all the traveler reads. They don't read enough good news, like you might do in Turkey. Right? That's why people would still go.
Chalana, I wanted to ask you about this as well, because what Shamir kind of latched onto that question there a little bit. We know that not only in tourism, but in a lot of industries in Sri Lanka, even with government regulation, that for a long time, public policy has been driven more by corruption and clientelism than actual policy needs. And I mean, Shamir was insinuating to the fact of, agencies clamoring for government money to run tourism branding campaigns. Maybe there is a degree of truth to the clientelism at practice there as well. But even with whether it's illegal businesses, illegitimate businesses, this
No,
lack
because
of
nothing. The reason
corruption.
is when the government has to spend money on advertising campaigns, then they are not bankrupt anymore.
Yeah.
Then they have all the money in the
Yeah.
world.
There's allegations against a former president's progeny also having made money off advertising campaigns. So, in this sort of culture, are you hopeful that we can see some kind of change, like Malik's talking about, that intent from the authorities that is absolutely necessary to take this industry forward?
I think my faith lies, and all of us here represent the private sector in different capacities. Some run businesses, others are consultants, operators, hoteliers, and so on, a combination. So from different generations, different perspectives, and I think we were all educated in different countries, but we're all Sri Lankan private sector working towards betterment for tourism. I think that the authorities will continue to feel increased pressure from the private citizens and private businesses of this country. The reason the country is afloat today, and I moved here shortly before the economic crisis of 2022, that government change happened also because 80% of this country's economy is private business, fortunately, right? And largely small and medium enterprises. That is the wealth and strength of Sri Lanka's economy. And tourism, in a large part, is also small, medium enterprises. You're looking at the majority of businesses, 12 rooms, selling between 5,000 to maximum 30,000 rupees a night, really 25,000 rupees a night. That's the bulk of the tourism accommodation business currently. So the authorities already recognize that. Now then you come into a situation where there is desperation of those working in the bureaucracy because salaries are low, X, Y, you all know all these reasons, right? So they look for opportunities to earn elsewhere because the cost of living for every Sri Lankan is so high, particularly those that work in jobs that are perhaps not private sector. So they will, I believe, they will feel increased pressure because pressure has been shown, right?
So pressure, let's say that pressure is felt at the top. When you come down to the bottom, let's say you're a police officer at the station, because here's where it gets tricky. Now, I've seen video evidence of this as well, of a police officer in uniform providing security at a whites-only party, right? Clearly inebriated as well. And this is on video. So that kind of, at the micro level, at the individual level, like I said, this is a cultural problem.
Yeah.
How are you going to change those hearts and minds, even if you have intent at the top?
I think there's it starts from discipline and filtering at the onset, something, the conversations. Sri Lanka tourism has gone through a lot in the past few years as well. I mean, this is post-COVID, right? There's visa scandals and so on. You've had so many changes in the visa regimes. Now, my premise is, and it might be an unpopular opinion, but I stand firmly on this, is why do we give free visas to so many nationalities, particularly those that can afford visas? Now, I am all for visa on arrival, but there needs to be a price. East Timor, one of the most impoverished countries in Asia, the youngest country in Asia, and one of the least visited, gives visa on arrival to everybody from all over the world, including Sri Lankans, but you pay $30. Yeah. Right? You pay $30.
Bhutan charges $100 a day.
Bhutan, that's a different model, completely different model, and we are far from that. It has its quirks as well, but what I'm trying to get at is, where have our authorities valued our own country?
That's not coming from the authorities.
And that's the question of if private sector pushes.
The point I made earlier,
Yeah, if private sector is pushing then to say no, increase arrivals, so give free visas to people who can obviously pay. Is that really the mindset?
So, but what I don't understand, Shanitha, is now we give free visas. Now we know there is a geopolitical conflict between Pakistan and India. We give free visas to India, but we don't give it to Pakistan. Why is that, Shanitha?
Well, these free visas are based on the agenda government puts over for a year. So they have a target of 5 billion tourists this year.
5 million.
5 million tourists this year. So they think spending the limited resources of budgets they have in the countries that they can bring in volume from. So that's Russia is one, India, our biggest neighbor, is one, and China is another. So they spend those little resources of marketing budgets in those countries, and they give free visas so that they can bring in the volumes to meet that target of 5 million tourists.
I have a question for you from one of our viewers.
Yeah.
Why isn't it that the American ambassador is not being summoned by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Vijay Herat, on this travel advisory?
Well, I don't think that is
in many
really...
countries, in most countries, that is what would happen.
We don't know if it
Well,
hasn't
not
happened.
summoned.
No,
Maybe
exactly.
they can have a conversation.
Summoned, having a
Summoning
conversation,
is
same
something
thing.
very serious.
But that's how. But technically, Shanitha,
Yeah.
when there is a matter of this sort, the foreign minister could summon
Yeah, so
the ambassador
I
in
just
question.
addressed this before in my earlier statement where I said we have a new regime in place. Let's turn the page and let these governments engage with these foreign missions so that these type of things does not repeat in the future.
No, but shouldn't we show who the boss is? You are in our country.
I think they are in good coordination, the current government with the foreign missions, especially America, they are in good
I
coordination.
think with the clarifications today, I mean, the clarifications don't get as much airplay as the original alert.
Yeah.
I think they're trying to say, look, it's safe to travel. It
Yeah, but
categorically is.
Malik, the question that I posed, Chalana, look at the opposition parties. Now, this is the time that the patriotic rhetoric can come to center stage.
You mean to support the
to support the state against the travel ban. But we don't see that. Where is the SJB Sajid Premadasa's campaign? Where is Ranil Wickramasinghe, who was a former president of the country? Where is the other political parties?
I have seen some in the SJB camp also coming out against this. It's not a ban, no? It's basically an alert,
Yes,
to be
travel
cautious,
alert, yes.
which gets picked up as sort of, Sri Lanka is dangerous, which obviously it isn't. But I think politicians are busy politicking now, so you'll basically pick holes saying, look, the government didn't take adequate precautions and that, this shouldn't have happened and they should have prevented the advisory. But what happened, and I really believe that the proper process was followed. And I think there was a error with the issue of the advisory, which the government or the embassy is kind of clarifying now. The problem is the damage is done.
Imagine, Malik. Now, Arosha is saying about it's important to have a good branding strategy. We should look at the branding that has to happen with the intervention of the state sector, that is the Ministry of Tourism. And you do all this, and then this happens.
But
what about all the effort that would be taken, and it will just go down the drain?
Thing is this, the way I look at it is, we have to take this as a wake-up call. This is going to happen again and again and again. It happened in 19, there was no advisory, but there was an attack which was far more devastating. Then it happened the year after COVID with the advisories, although tourists were absolutely safe throughout the period of the unrest and the Aragalaya, yet people didn't come for a year and a half. Now, mark my words, in the next 24 months, this will again happen a couple of times. But we have to be better prepared, where we are able to reach consumers beyond the advisories and not be victim to errors of judgment by foreign embassies, which can happen again and again. Again, it's subjective.
Malik, you repeatedly said that Sri Lanka is safe. Would you walk down the streets of Arugambe today at midnight?
Absolutely. I think anyone would.
Would you do the same in Washington, D.C.?
Depends which part. No,
Yeah,
probably
there
not.
you go. All right. So,
Can I tell you, even those issuing the advisories would walk down the streets of Arugambe at midnight, I can assure you. But the point is, people are also ticking the boxes. I've done it. But they haven't thought through the implications, the consequences, and it may not be their problem
So,
that
in
we
other
have
words, the
a
idea-
woeful reputation in terms of marketing and positioning the
Yeah, but
destination.
that's a good point that Nivesh brought in. You could walk in Arugambe at 12 midnight, but if you go to New York, certain parts of New York, you can't do that in the night. If you go to France, you can't do that in the night. Certain parts.
But that doesn't help Sri Lanka tourism. I mean, we're focusing on our problem. So in terms of what we need to do and get our act together, can I just go back a little bit, right?
Malik, I'll come back to you in a minute.
Sorry.
I just want to ask Shanitha. Shanitha, now, why is that foreign missions are issuing statements on Sri Lanka's security situation before the security establishments in Sri Lanka?
Sorry, I didn't get your question.
Why is that foreign missions issue statements on the security of the country prior to security establishments in the country issuing a statement or taking actions regarding such issues?
I mean, shouldn't it be the ideal situation that our
Well, I think what
institutions
was happened, I
that
was
could help our tourism?
telling before that discussion is when the government received the intelligence, they acted on it immediately. But only thing they didn't do is to issue a
Publicize,
statement
publicize, yeah,
or
publicize.
have a press conference or issue a media release to all the media
Publicize it.
channels.
Which
Publicize
they
it.
shouldn't have done.
I think,
Yeah.
anywhere in the world, when you have intelligence, you act on it, but you don't make a big circus out of it, because that's the way you handle things. And
Yeah.
even we had some tourists that actually, some chauffeurs of ours that actually gave us, a few reports. There was a more police presence in certain areas.
Maxime,
So it was-
just to be the devil's advocate here. Now, we saw what happened in 2019. Malik said it was a devastating attack, and we saw approximately 250 people died
Yeah.
as a result of the multiple bomb attacks in Sri
Yeah.
Lanka. So, wasn't this a step just to alert their citizens?
Look, I think, at the end of the day, we also have to be extremely careful about our security, because if even a small incident happened, it would have been much more devastating for us, right? I, again, don't have the, inside talk or understand why this exactly was put in place, but, they will always err on caution, and maybe that could have been a reason. But, I think what exactly the point Shanitha
Yeah. So-
has done is
The
that
difference was that
Yeah.
in 2019 they didn't act on the intelligence,
Yeah.
but here they act.
Right.
No,
so,
so-
so Shanitha, isn't this boiling down to the real problem that we're talking about? If the then government took concrete actions to curb and curtail what went wrong in 2019, we wouldn't have been in this situation. That is a responsibility of the Gotabaya Rajapaksa administration, then Ranil Wickramasinghe's administration. Now at least we see Anil Kumar Dissanayake trying to do something as well. But don't you think if the situation was addressed in 2019, right after the attack took place, we wouldn't be in this position talking about travel advisories?
This security alert or the threat came because of a certain incident in the Middle East, the war that is going on, and Israelis are obviously a target any part of the world, not only in Sri Lanka, maybe in US or anywhere. So this incident happened only because of the Middle East war, heightened tensions between the two Muslims and the Arab world, and also the Israelis. So that's why Israelis are an easy target here. So luckily we got the information before government acted on it, and I think that should rest the
So
case.
Malik said you can't even form a cricket match if you look at the numbers of the Israel tourists in Arugambe.
At the time of the
At the time of
this.
the- at
That's
the time
because
of
we
the
are at the
advisory.
end of the season now. Almost the season is over. Now we are into the monsoon, so hardly any tourists traveling to Arigambe by request. Even the surfers have gone back. So this is that small community that decided to live there is still hanging on.
Why I'm telling you all this, Malik, in 2007 I happened to be in Arugambe when the 13 Muslims were murdered by the LTTE in the east of the country. It was one of the most difficult times for Sri Lanka and even tourism at that time, and no one even knew that Arugambe existed at that time. And after a prolonged period of time, we've been able to build Arugambe as a tourist hub. We see tourists coming to Sri Lanka. We see individuals coming to surf in the coastal belt of the country, the eastern coastal belt of the country. When such travel advisories are issued, don't you feel hurt that Sri Lanka has tried to rebuild our nation after the 2009 war? And look at where we are today. We're still talking about security. We're still talking about safety. We shouldn't be talking about all this anymore, because 2009, end of the conflict, was a stop to all this. And we're still talking about it.
But the nature of the threat has diminished substantially. Despite the advisory, there are still tourists there. And this was a very minor plot by the sounds of it, based on information that we have.
Plot? What do you mean?
No, this particular evidence that was received in terms of a potential attack was a fairly small scale homemade plot, it appears to be, right? So we've come a long way. I mean, and in the sense that Sri Lanka always bounces back. The frustrating thing is that the Arugambe alert becomes a proxy for all of Sri Lanka. And that alert for that particular little hamlet with the 20 Israelis also alerting Americans not to go, and there probably weren't any, nor did any intend to go there, being off season, and again being off the beaten path. has actually potentially impacted. So I think the impact is not so much on Arugambe or on security per se, but that it just sends a negative message when the country is coming back strongly for tourism. So that's the annoying, damaging factor. But I mean, since there has not been any incident, touch wood, and the news cycle seems to have ended, I think we've survived. However, the learnings we have to take. I'll just come back to an earlier point that we spoke about, whether a government will actually be serious about getting tourism onto a solid footing with branding, with proper infrastructure, and get the kind of travelers who will actually spend money. Now, if you look at the tourism board, there are multiple, it's a bit unusual, we have several tourist boards, which is not common, but whichever number there are, they are funded by the taxes paid by pretty much all the operators here. We pay a 1% tax, cess, which doesn't largely get spent. It sits in the Bank of Ceylon. Every time the treasury runs out of cash, which is quite regularly, it then gets swept into the treasury, and our promotional fund is just totally wasted. So the answer to that is to stop paying that cess and spend it ourselves as a collective in branding and positioning the destination, because important thing is we've got
How much money is there in the kitty in terms of this promotional fund?
I reckon, well, it used to be $30 million with the devaluation, probably 15, 6, 7, 8 billion, something like that. So it's there.
Yeah. What about the interest?
That's probably accumulated over 2 or 3 years, it's not spent.
So the interest?
Interest bearing, whatever, 7, 8%.
So who's using that interest? Is that
the money belongs to the tourist board. They use part of it for admin expenses. The majority of it is meant to be for promotion and marketing. And does it get spent on promotion and marketing? No, it's what.
But Malik, now over the last 2 years, now you're saying about promotion and market. I've seen the Minister of Tourism, the Chairman of the Tourist Board, they're going on promotional campaigns, trade fairs, exhibitions.
Trade fairs is not consumer marketing. I'm talking about consumer marketing. Trade fairs, anyone would like, any official would love to go to a trade fair because it's a foreign trip, right? So going to trade fairs is something that is done in abundance. But that does not help the tourism industry in terms of sales and consumers, because consumers don't go to trade fairs.
Yeah, look, I think it does play its place, but it's something we've been doing since I think Sri Lanka has started. But
you're not going to bring high-value travelers.
Trade fairs, trade fairs were there before the internet was invented.
Yeah.
You go to a trade fair and you meet someone you were talking to on Zoom yesterday.
Yeah.
It's a pre-internet dinosaur. But what you need to do as marketing is Google AdWords, PR, magazines, newspapers, however people consume content, marketing on TikTok, marketing on Instagram. Rwanda, one of the first things they came out of genocide is they spent $30 million and they took the sponsorship of Arsenal, right? And then they built up a beautiful little airline that Qatar Airlines bought, and in this country.
Right. So I want to talk about airlines. When you speak about airlines, Malik, Shanitha, tell me, do we need Sri Lankan Airlines?
Yes, we need.
And why is that?
Well, there is no other national carrier. I mean, this is our only national carrier. All other carriers come and go. They will stop when they want to. They will cut down flights when they want to. But this is our national carrier serving
I can give you a classic example, Shanitha. There are at least 3 flights coming from Dubai to Colombo, that is Emirates.
Yeah.
You have over 3 flights, 2 or 3 flights, I'm not really sure about it, coming from Qatar to Colombo.
4 flights in
4
the
flights,
winter,
right. So, Sri Lankan Airlines, how many times does it travel to?
So I'm not particularly worried about the Middle East sector.
No, but
the service,
we are burning money.
They have about 100 flights to the region of India, Sri Lankan Airlines. Then they are serving Europe, London, Delhi.
But do we need it?
I think we need
Well, we have it, so we've got to do something
It has
with
to
it.
be financially viable, though.
Yeah,
Obviously.
it's got to be viable.
Operationally, Sri Lankan Airlines is making money. It's profitable. Malik can address that more because he was on the board. Where we lose money is because of financial debt servicing, because of the huge loans.
Why does Emirates do well? Because of Dubai, because of the airport, because it's all interconnected. An airline like Sri Lankan was doing well, and then, all the political mishandling, and that's a different story, and that's where the downward trajectory started. But in terms of getting it back on track, airline is directly connected to the position of the country and tourism and trade in the country. Airlines make money on the front cabin, generally. So if you look at business class, you want the higher end travelers. You've got travelers who will pay a premium to travel in business and prefer to travel non-stop. Higher end travelers do not want to break journey. Why are Emirates and Qatar over the top in terms of in-flight? Because it's a hell of an inconvenient way to travel. You want to go from A to B, you have to go to C first, right? So you arrive there 2 a.m. So it's not a pleasant way for high-end travelers to fly. High-end travelers, if you look at Rwanda Air, if you look at Vietnam Air, if you look at Air Fiji, you look at how these destinations have repositioned themselves. You create yourself as you brand the destination, you brand the airline, everything is connected.
So Malik, a good point that you came to. Now, every time you travel on Sri Lankan Airlines, let's take a look at the Melbourne sector for an example. It's packed. Let's take the London sector for an example. It's packed. Sri Lankan Airlines is still making losses. Why?
That is largely because of previous debts. There's about $600-700 of debt.
But Airbus deal that took place in 2015, that is not the responsibility of the public. They pay money and go on the airline, Malik.
Right now, you have an airline. There needs to be a clear direction. Either you reposition it, you need to refleet, you need to have more non-stop routes, you need to connect it with a better tourism product, right? Right now, a lot of it is labor traffic, expat traffic, Sri Lankans visiting friends and relatives, which is low margin business, right? So, an airline will do as well as the country. You've got to do it hand in glove.
But Malik, if you look at the prices, if you look at the sector from Colombo to Melbourne,
it's non-stop.
It's non-stop, and it costs around 1.2 million Sri Lankan rupees for a business class ticket, for an example.
But it's the same in dollars as it was before the devaluation. Now, for direct flights, there is a premium versus if you go on SQ or MAS, it'll be cheaper because direct flights are always more expensive because it's a preferable option, right? So the issue with UL is that it's a good product, it's got a good reputation, it's creaking a little bit here and there simply because of the fact that you need more investment. But it's connected to the fate of tourism and business. Now, Sri Lanka doesn't get FDI. We don't have business travelers coming here now. We don't get FDI because you need to create an enabling environment.
Well, based on what Maxime is saying, small-scale tourists come and set up operations.
Yeah, that's not FDI. That's not FDI.
Tourist visa,
So it's very difficult for an airline to thrive when your tourism product is weak and your business product is weak. That's why BA flew, and after 6 months they pulled out.
Twice, thrice they stopped the flights because they can't fill the business class.
I think, look, can I just postulate something? We've got great product. If you look at particularly South Coast, East Coast, you've got great Sri Lankan hoteliers, entrepreneurs, right? You've got people like those smoke and bitters guys who've gone top 30, 40 bars in the world. Then you've got expats who've done things. Then we've got amazing locals who've created fabulous products, right? But everybody is looking for the kind of traveler who will spend good money and give them a return on their investment. If you look at the big brands, if you look at the Anantaras, the Shangri-Las, the Hiltons, you ask the owners, because they're all locally owned, they're foreign brands, so the money gets sent out, they're local. They're not happy because they're not getting a return. So the alternate hypothesis I'm giving is, I think this government is serious in terms of, because they understand clearly that the bottom of the pyramid, 3, 4, 5 million people are empowered by tourism, right? Whether it's the tuk-tuk driver or the fishmonger or the fruit seller, whatever, right? And that's why travelers come here, because we're raw and we're authentic. I'm saying that we should be a lot more proactive as an industry. If the government isn't going to spend our marketing cess, don't pay the marketing cess. Go to the Supreme Court, file a fundamental rights case saying the government is not spending our cess on promotion. We form our own body, spend the cess, position it, and get on with it with whoever in government wants to help us.
Is this something you think the Sri Lanka Tourism Alliance should do?
Listen, we formed this group because there were a few of us who were really angry with what should be happening and not. But
And
the
you're
point,
still angry,
Huh?
Malik. You're still angry.
yeah, but nothing has changed.
Now,
Look at
you all
destinations.
formed this alliance in 2019.
But, you know, can I tell you, after 22, the first global promotion campaign was done by the Alliance. We got money from different agencies and we did the first. I mean, you were part of that whole thing, right? So, because the thing is, our tourism, I'm not blaming the people in the tourist boards because they've been put there. I'm saying as a government, you need to be serious about tourism. You need to restructure, exactly like you said, Chalana did, create a proper nation branding tourism infrastructure to get tourists who spend money.
So,
So
Arosha,
you're talking about upmarketing, right?
I am saying you create the positioning, then the up market, middle market, down market, all will come. But what it means is from top to bottom, if you're a 2-star and now you get $30, you'll get 60. If you're a 3 and you're getting 50, you'll get 80. If you look at the Maldives, right? If you go on Airbnb and you search for the Maldives, an Airbnb in the Maldives is $250. An Airbnb in Sri Lanka on average is 6. So people should not worry thinking I am low end, now what about me when you talk of high end? It's like the Mercedes BMW model. Why do you buy a BMW 1 Series? Because of the 7, right? So I'm saying, I think we all agree, start positioning this destination to get the return that our people deserve and for the government to collect the taxes they need.
Yeah.
Because
So,
it's an amazing product that's totally
so
undersold.
Arosha, what is your thought on the cess on tourism? Do you think that the tourism ministry or the tourist board should do more, or is it something that you think should be given to the private sector so that they could spend the money available and do their promotions on their own?
The fact is, it's unutilized funds, which the industry has paid. So I think it definitely needs to be used. I think the private sector right now, the way things look, may be in a better position to make use of it. But it remains to be seen what the new, the authorities intend to do, because we don't know yet, and they've just started, right? So I think it's a viable option where that money is actually being, funneled to an entity that can actually make use of it. I would like to make just one point that I think Malik also touched on. The branding is not really about logos and taglines, like he said. What is missing is this fundamental point of where are we going to be competitive as a tourism destination in the long term. That has never been done.
The positioning itself.
Yeah, I mean, positioning has to be from the point of view of which kind of travelers do you want in Sri Lanka. If that's the case, what do we as a destination need to offer those travelers? Which is what things like the PCO Trail were really trying to do. Because you need a transformation. It can't be inward looking where you have X, Y, and Z and you're trying to sell what you have.
So I mean, if I put it in like business terms, we do need to do, because we have a raw product.
Yeah.
We do need to do not just the marketing, we need to do the market research and the product development as well.
Development and marketing need to work hand in hand.
Can I tell you something? People pay for rawness, authenticity. Our product, if anyone tells me we need to develop it further, you need it. But the fact that we are authentic, raw, genuine, it requires a premium. That's what the traveler wants. They come back and say, my God, 30 years, this is like Bali 30 years ago. Because Bali has got sophisticated, has got built up. They pay for the fact that we are rustic, we are off the beaten track. So we mustn't lose that.
That's what you have to protect.
Yeah, protected but enhanced products like PCO Trail.
So, Chalana, you champion sustainable tourism. Tell us a little bit about what is sustainable tourism for the public to understand, because when you speak about the buzzwords, it seems something that is not reachable or cannot be connected or cannot be implemented.
Yeah, so what I champion is more regenerative tourism. So it's one up from sustainable tourism, because we and the whole world, you can't afford to sustain, Sri Lanka can't be sustained the way it is going now. And I'm not only talking from an ecological perspective. I think the biggest pain point in the Sri Lankan context is from the human perspective. And if you look at human capital and just the depletion of our human resources, people are just leaving. We're talking about bringing people in to visit our country while we've had now 3 million Sri Lankan citizens work outside the country, right? 14% of our population. That's the last central bank stats from this year. That's sizable. There's nothing wrong with that. But regenerative tourism is about improving the quality of a place for local residents first. And that means uplifting the quality of the biodiversity, natural resources, etc., everything that is so applicable to the soil of this land. As a result of that, people will want to flock here. And that is exactly what's happened in Costa Rica. That's exactly what's happening in Mongolia, in Bhutan, in Rwanda, Namibia, Botswana. These countries are paradise for very high-value travelers. And I don't mean to be elitist in any shape. I do agree that we need to have all price points, but you set the price point with the top, with the business class and the private jets and so on. That allows you to finance conservation. That allows you to finance the regeneration of water sources, which this island is full of. We can be a net exporter of high-quality water to the world. And people will pay a premium to drink straight out of a spring on the PCO Trail. They really, that's a luxury experience.
Look at how France is promoting water from the French Alps, for an example.
Yeah, I mean, we have fresh air, we have really high-quality herbal ingredients that are indigenous. We have one of the highest rates of species endemism in the world, not just biodiversity, but endemic to this land, which means in terms of cuisine, health benefits are phenomenal. So there's a lot from the storytelling, nation branding angle that we're just not doing, we're failing to do, because a lot of the people who sit in those seats don't appreciate that. And their idea of a holiday is a buffet at brand X. Or their idea of a holiday is very different to what the experiential travel markets that all of us are talking about. There is a level of passport privilege that puts the average Sri Lankan bureaucrat in an awkward position, and that's why they crave the trade fair. But the reality is there is internet and there is a next generation, and Sri Lankans are aware of what those experiences are.
So I just want to pick everyone's brain in that last round as to what the way forward is for Sri Lanka. Now, we have a travel advisory that was in place on the 23rd of October. What must we do now from this point onwards as a nation? What must we do collectively to build tourism and ensure that we hit that 5 million tourist mark at least by the end of next year? So let's start off with Chalana.
I think it's getting a really solid message across that's apolitical, regardless of who is in power and who is doing what. It's really a consistent, solid message, and telling a powerful narrative story, which is that this is the healing island of the world. We've been through a lot. Everybody knows that the press does a good job of talking about the negatives, but I think you have to flip the coin and spin the story and talk about all the champions and the successful stories, and the fact that it is teeming with biodiversity, that we have a decent forest cover ratio, there are so many organizations working to increase that. So you have a product that is actually, you can't compare with other products. You can't compare with other tropical island destinations. When I talk about Sri Lanka, I don't talk about the beach, right? I talk about we have all these other things, and oh, by the way, it's an island in the tropics. So we need to really understand who we are, appreciate who we are, and the government has to also, and not sell ourselves short, and not come across as this desperate trying to get 5 million or 10 million, whatever number. But hey, we're actually really high value. If you want to come here, pay, and we need to then deliver. Right? So that should be the focus, increasing the value perception internally from the stakeholders.
Maxime?
Look, I think that's pretty spot on. I think also like this chasing of numbers is, if we get 5 million tourists next year, we're in like big trouble, I would say, because we can't handle it. And I think we just as a destination really need to know what where we go. We can't, we've come to a point where most of our infrastructure is...
I just want to interrupt you there for a second. Now you say the 5 million tourist mark is not achievable?
No, not at all. I mean, I think it was in
I think it should be a dollar figure, not a number.
But then again, how do we really quantify that dollar figure also is another problem I think we always come up with. No, look, I think, we just have to really look at, getting a quality product out there and finally getting that story told about Sri Lanka. I think we also have to be very worried and certainly a bit apprehensive of, how we handle the extreme numbers that we are actually planning to get. Like, where do we do that? And when we do that, do we devalue our natural resources? Can we handle that in certain parks? How do we manage that? I think those are really the critical answers also what you have to do. First, of course, you can't do that overnight. First, you put out the beautiful image of our country, make people want to come to Sri Lanka. Because, if you get people more demand and, with our limited rooms, generally the value goes up, and that's just simple. Yeah. And I think, that's really what we have to do. We also have to be very mindful of our product as well. It's really varied from the $5 to, the $1,000 as well. So we really have to understand also maybe how you can work with the locals to improve their product. I think right now, if there's a local trying to set up a business, it's just his idea. There's no one to really help him. And, you can do a lot of mentorship. You can do a lot of things actually to get these you look at different countries and these homestay products, all these little products, you have some really high value And like you said, certain places can be charging big amounts if they just, or I believe, get a bit of guidance as well to get there. So I think, not always look at numbers, look at quality, but also, definitely get the word out there for Sri Lanka.
Maxime, very quickly, if there was someone who's watching the show tonight and who was skeptic about visiting Sri Lanka because of what transpired after the 23rd of October, what's that message going to be?
Well, absolutely. There's, Sri Lanka hasn't stopped for a day. We've had, over hundreds of tourists in Sri Lanka, and none of them really knew of anything that happened in Sri Lanka. Nothing has really changed, and, nothing has changed at all. And, these are things that happen everywhere in the world. It's been dealt with, and, the country is still the same and still beautiful, and you come and visit it.
Thank you very much, Maxime. Arosha.
I really think we should take this as a learning experience. This is certainly not going to be the last time it's happened. I think what's important is that our level of preparedness for crisis management really has to take a leap. We see the private sector doing a few things, and I think Malik has been on the lead on that. But as Sri Lanka tourism, as the representative body of the nation, there needs to be scenario planning. That's how it happens. We can easily identify. We've gone through so much. We know the things that can go wrong, right? From pandemics to terrorist attacks to tsunamis to advisories like this. We need to have an action plan for those scenarios. Communication is what stems from that action plan. I think that's absolutely absent. I think a 2-line press release is not going to cut it. That's what we've seen so far.
Yeah.
So preparedness, crisis management, planning, I think, in addition to all the other things we've discussed in terms of branding and so on, it's really a must.
Thank you very much, Arosha. Shanitha.
Right. In the must-do agenda, I think the first and foremost, we must do the country positioning first. This has been, for 15 years, we have not been able to do a huge destination promotion or a positioning or a branding exercise. If you see countries like New Zealand, however they are small, if you want to see a quintessential branding campaign, 100% pure New Zealand, or the Truly Asia by Malaysia, or the Incredible India campaign. What they have done and the results that they have brought in to position those countries. We are way behind. We haven't even started on it. So the money is there. I think only thing the last time the government couldn't spend that money was because of the foreign dollar crisis, because they had to pay a huge amount of dollars out. So I hope we have a new government in place, a new thinking process. It's just that they are also inexperienced in the tourism trade, so they are also relying on many professional people to come forward and help them. I'm sure at some point we'll get engaged. I'm very confident they'll listen to us and do the right thing. Of course, we can't expect any result very soon because they have to establish a government and so on and so forth. That's the destination marketing side. Personally, coming this far over the years, I think personally from my company, I spend about 25% of my earnings for marketing. And Malik must be doing the same or even more. So the private sector is running this business and we are carrying it forward. But in order to be prepared for an adversity like this, what happened on 23rd of October, if the destination marketing campaign was on, or if the positioning of Sri Lanka had been done, I'm sure we would have had lots of PR officers worldwide to coordinate all these efforts. So our response would have been very quick to counter all those attacks as a deterrence. So unfortunately, that was not the case. So I'm sure.
Sharad, very quickly, I just want to ask you this question now. In an event where travel advisories have been issued by nations, do we have a stringent mechanism to combat these negative publicity by the embassy staff? Do we have a mechanism in place?
No, because they don't have the reach. Sri Lanka embassies, unless they do a digital strategy or put something in media in those newspapers, I don't think there is a reach in those countries. That's where the PR companies come into play, because they have the reach, the CNN to the magazines, all these newspapers.
Right.
So,
Thank you very much, Shanitha. I want to move to Malik to have the final word.
Yeah, when it comes to the impact of these advisories, when you don't have your own consumer marketing, when you aren't getting your message out, if someone searches, the advisory becomes disproportionately important, because that's one of the few things they read, because that has a higher search engine ranking value, because it's what the Australian government or the UK government or the US government is saying about Sri Lanka. What the Sri Lankan government is saying about Sri Lanka is largely absent. So when someone is planning their holiday or searching for information, in the case of Sri Lanka, because there's limited positive news coming out in a structured manner from the country, travelers chance upon advisories, which scare the hell out of them. So going back to what we've heard, we have to get our act together in terms of finally enough talking, start a marketing and promotional department for Sri Lanka in whatever shape or form, as long as it's effective, because the current structure is thoroughly ineffective. Secondly, what makes your life far easier, whoever's going to do it, is there are average destinations with great marketers which are doing tremendously well internationally. There are fabulous destinations like Sri Lanka. We've got something for everybody. The Daily Telegraph, which is probably one of the most respected newspapers in the UK, did a bit of a survey on Indian Ocean Islands. They looked at the Maldives, they looked at Mauritius, Seychelles and Sri Lanka. And Sri Lanka came out on top. And they concluded, because we are the island that has it all. It's a marketer's dream, but unfortunately there's no one marketing it. So I think the state understands the importance and will get its act together. If the state doesn't, I really think the private sector needs to do something about it, because it's largely our investment. And 3 to 5 million people are dependent on our industry for their survival. So for me, that's the one single takeout stemming from the trigger, which is the advisory.
Thank you very much, Malik Fernando, Chairman, Sri Lanka Tourism Alliance. Shanitha Fernando, Founder, CEO of Authenticities. Arosha Perera, Consultant in Tourism Marketing. Maxime Wickramasinghe, Director Marketing, Thermo Collection, as well as Chalana Perera, Founder of Retraced Hospitality, for joining us this evening on the show to discuss about how to protect Sri Lanka's tourism industry when there's turbulent weather right across us. Thank you very much, Shanitha, Consultant Director at Newsfirst. Thank you very much, Nadeem, for joining us this evening on the show. And you too for joining us and posing questions from our panelists on the number 076-656-5353. We are back again on Wednesday at 9:30 discussing about the political landscape in Sri Lanka and giving you some thought before you go to the polling booth. But on this topic, I want to leave you tonight with a quote, as I always do. One's dignity may be assaulted, vandalized and cruelly mocked, but it can never be taken away unless it is surrendered. We cannot be bullied by nations who think they reign supreme than us. Don't hurt us. We are a nation which builds with open arms, and we want to build with a very big heart. We open our arms and invite you to visit Sri Lanka, because this is a nation and we will invite you again and again. This is Sri Lanka. You will come back for more. Take care. Good night.